If you build a taxable brokerage account the wrong way, you may not notice the mistake this month. You may not even notice it this year. That is what makes it dangerous. The damage often hides in plain sight. A dividend that looks generous but gets taxed like ordinary income. A high-yield ETF that feels productive but quietly leaks efficiency. A portfolio that looks diversified but is really a collection of ideas fighting each other. A pile of positions that sounds intelligent at dinner but makes no sense in the only place that matters, after tax, after fee, after volatility, after life gets involved. That is the danger. And I have always believed that the most expensive financial mistakes are not the ones that explode. They are the ones that feel respectable. That is why I want to talk about the taxable brokerage account in a very different way from how most people talk about it. Most people treat it as the side account, the extra account, the account after the 401k, after the IRA, after the Roth, after the important things. I do not think that is the right way to think. A taxable brokerage is not a toy. It is not the random bucket. It is not where you throw whatever ETF looks exciting this month. It is one of the most revealing accounts in a person's financial life because it exposes whether he actually understands how wealth works, wants taxes, behavior, optionality, and long-term compounding start interacting in the real world. The source text made this plain right at the beginning. Taxable brokerage investing is fundamentally different from investing in a 401k IRA or Roth because the tax treatment changes the rules of the game. Retirement accounts are tax-deferred or tax-free, depending on the structure, while the taxable brokerage gives liquidity and access without early withdrawal penalties, but taxes your gains and taxes your dividends as they occur. That difference is not a footnote. It is the center of the whole strategy. File site. Turn 36, File 0, Fail 21. L33 Fail site, Turn 36, File 0, Fail L35, L53 That is where I would begin this story, with a lie people tell themselves. The lie is that all long-term investing is basically the same if you buy good things and hold them. Number not inside a taxable account. Inside a taxable account, structure matters, tax character matters, turnover matters, yield type matters, fund selection matters, behavior matters, and one careless decision repeated over years can cost more than one dramatic mistake made once. That is why I get nervous when I see people chase the thing that looks most generous on the surface. A very high dividend, a very high payout, a monthly distribution that feels like a paycheck. That seduction is understandable. The source text used JEPQ as an example, and it was exactly the right example. The headline yield looks attractive, but much of that distribution is ordinary income rather than qualified dividends, making it generally tax inefficient in a taxable account, especially for higher earners. A fund can look rich and still leave you poorer than you expected once the tax drag begins doing its quiet work. Faithful site, Turn 36 File 2 Fail 29 L46 I want to be clear, I am not against cash flow, I am not against dividends, I am not against being paid, but I am against confusing visible income with intelligent after-tax wealth building. That confusion has cost people fortunes. A taxable brokerage is where you need to stop admiring what looks productive and start respecting what survives taxation and time. That is why qualified dividends matter. The source text explained this properly. In taxable accounts, some dividends are qualified and taxed at favorable long-term capital gains. Type rates, often materially lower than a person's ordinary income rate, while non-qualified dividends may be taxed at full ordinary income rates, plus state tax where applicable. That is not a trivial detail. It means two funds with superficially similar cash flows can create very different outcomes in your real life. File site, Turn 36 File 0 L54 L69 This is the first real adult lesson of the taxable account. The account is not asking what sounds richest, it is asking what remains richest after the system takes its cut. That is a different standard, and once you adopt that standard, the portfolio becomes much cleaner. Now let us walk through the structure I actually respect. I do not respect taxable accounts built like junk drawers. I respect them when they are built like systems. The source material separated the account into categories, and beneath the tutorial style there was real wisdom there. Not because labels are magical, but because categories force each position to justify its role. A taxable account built this way has purpose: one position for qualified value, and dividend exposure, one for core market ownership, one for international diversification, one for broad growth, and perhaps one small aggressive growth slice. if the person's risk tolerance and time horizon justify it. That is not random collecting. That is architecture. Fay file a site. Fay turn 36 file 2. Fay L47 L82. Fay file a site. Fay turn 36 file 4. Fay L30 LA38. Fay file a site. Fay turn 36 file 6 AL64 L83. Fay architecture matters. The first category I would want in a taxable account is what I would call qualified defensive cash flow equity. Not because I want to retire on yield tomorrow, because in a taxable account I like positions that can do two jobs at once when chosen well, give some cash flow, and hold up better psychologically and structurally when markets turn ugly. That is why the reference file pointed toward SAG, VIM, and VTV in this category. They are not there because they are flashy. They are there because they represent different shades of quality, value, qualified, dividend exposure, and lower volatility behavior relative to more aggressive growth holdings. The file specifically favored SAG for stronger dividend cash flow and VTV for lower dividend burden and potentially better tax efficiency. If the investor wants to minimize taxable distributions, that is exactly the kind of distinction people need to understand. Fay file a site. Fay turn 36 file 2 Fay A47 L82. Fay the taxable account is not the place to chase the fattest visible yield. It is the place to ask whether the yield is doing useful work for your life. SAG may be useful if you want qualified dividend cash flow and lower beta ballast. VTV may be useful if you want value exposure with less emphasis on taxable distributions. VIM may fit those who want broad high dividend exposure without getting too cute. The exact pick matters less to me than the principle. The principle is that the dividend sleeve must deserve its tax bill. That is a standard more people should use. Now let us talk about cash. Not emotional cash, strategic cash. The source file made a point I appreciated here too. Many people ask where cash should live inside a brokerage, and the ordinary money market sweep may be acceptable, but yields move with rates. While SCUV was highlighted as a place the speaker preferred for cash because of its treasury, bill exposure, roughly competitive yield, and no state tax on the treasury income component. That is not a universal commandment. It is an illustration of the deeper point. Even cash location inside a taxable structure has tax character. The lazy answer and the intelligent answer are not always the same answer. Fay file a site. Fay turn 36 file 0 Fay L70 L83. Fay, that is another adult lesson. Nothing in a taxable account should be there, merely because it is there by default. Defaults are expensive. This is also why I agreed with the File S warning about bonds in taxable brokerage accounts. Traditional bond funds commonly distribute ordinary income, which is exactly the sort of tax character many investors do not want in their taxable account. If they have better places to hold fixed income, that does not mean fixed income is useless. It means account location matters. A thing may be fine in a retirement account and clumsy in a taxable one. Fay file site. Fay turn 36 file 4 Fay L1 L5 Fay that account. Location wisdom is a huge part of what separates grown-up investing from simple product collecting. Now we move to the core, and here I want to be forceful. Every taxable brokerage that claims to be a serious long-term wealth account should have a foundational ownership engine. No excuses, no glamour, no overthinking. The reference text put this in the right place. The foundational sleeve is the part built around broad U.S. market ownership, either the S&P 500 or the total U.S. stock market. The argument here is not cleverness, it is durability. The market has been through depression, bubbles, crises, pandemics, and wars, and broad ownership kept compounding through all of it for those who stayed invested. That long-run resilience is exactly what a taxable account needs at its center. Fay file a site. Fay turn 36 file 4 Fay L7 L30 Fay. That is why I trust VO or VTI. Not because they are exciting, because they do not need to be exciting. The file made a useful practical point here too. Once two ETFs are genuinely tracking the same index in a similar way, the difference often comes down to cost, not to marketing language or share price illusions. A lower share price does not make an S&P 500 ETF more accessible in any meaningful investment sense if fractional shares are available or if the investor can simply buy what fits his cash flow. The thing that matters is the index exposure and the fee. That is a grown-up way to compare Fay file site, Fay turn 36 file 1 Fay L1. L24 Fay, then the long-run comparison between VTI and VO was presented honestly. Close, very close, slightly different historical averages, but neck and neck over a long period. That is another lesson worth preserving. Do not turn small differences into ideological religions. A person can waste years choosing between two excellent broad market vehicles while contributing too little and staying too inconsistent. That is foolish. A great portfolio loses more to delay than to choosing VTI over VU or VU over VTI. Fay file site, Fay turn 36, file 1 Fay L25. L39 Fay. I would rather an investor own one of them faithfully for decades than spend 3 years talking about optimization while building nothing. That is how I think about the core. Now, should there be international exposure? Yes, but with proportion. The reference file was sensible here. Vexus was presented not as a superior long-run growth engine to U.S. equities, but as a diversification sleeve. That distinction matters. The case for international is not that it has historically dominated the U.S. over long stretches. The case is that it widens your economic exposure beyond a single country and a single policy environment. The file also warned not to over-romanticize recent international outperformance because the longer history has been weaker than U.S. broad market returns. I think that is exactly the right emotional posture. Diversify, but do not daydream. Fay file site, Fay turn 36, file 1, Fay 40 L77 Fay. That is how I would use Vexus. Not as the hero, as a supporting actor, enough to matter, not enough to become a drag on your conviction. Then comes growth, and this is where many people start making emotional mistakes. They think growth means recklessness, or they think growth means the hot thing of the month. I do not mean either. The file was smart here too. It separated broad growth from aggressive sector speculation. Broad growth was defined as growth oriented exposure with multiple sectors and major leadership companies, not simply one concentrated bet. That is why QQQM, South Carolina HG, and VUG were all mentioned. This is not growth in the childish sense. It is growth exposure wrapped in a structure that still has scale, liquidity, and a reason to exist inside a long-run account. Fay file site, Fay turn 36, file 6 Fay L1, L16 Fay file site, Fay turn 36, file 6 L17, L54 Fay. I like QQM here for a specific reason. It is not because I think the NASDAQ 100 is perfect. It is because it gives a taxable account a clear growth engine without charging the investor the extra fee drag of its older twin. QQQ, the source text made that point directly. Same broad NASDAQ 100 concept, lower fee, and the fee difference matters whenever you have close substitutes. That is not penny pinching. It is respect for compounding. Fay file site, Fay turn 36, file 6 Fay L26, L33 Fay. I also like that. The file acknowledged SAG, VUG, and even SEMO as legitimate alternatives in the broad growth category. Again, the larger lesson matters more than the ticker list. The taxable account should know exactly why it owns growth. It owns growth because future compounding still matters, because innovation and business leadership deserve a seat in the portfolio, and because a defensive dividend sleeve by itself is not enough if the account is meant to build meaningful wealth over time. That is the tension I want. Cash flow and ballast on one side, broad ownership in the center, growth pressure on the other side, then only if the person understands himself well enough. One final sleeve, aggressive growth. This is optional, and I appreciate that the source file treated it as optional rather than mandatory. That is honest. Not every person needs a concentrated bet. Not every account benefits from one, but for some investors, a limited sleeve devoted to a narrower theme can be emotionally and financially appropriate if it remains clearly subordinate to the core. The file used examples like semiconductors, mining, Bitcoin, and then expressed preference for VGT because it offered technology concentration with more breadth and more consistency than some wilder alternatives. That is a useful distinction. Aggressive does not have to mean reckless. It can simply mean narrower, more volatile, and sized with humility. Fay file site, Fay turn 36, file 6 AL64, L83. Fay. I like humility in this sleeve. A lot of humility. If you make the aggressive sleeve too large, the account stops being a system and becomes a mood. That is not what I want. I do not want mood. Base taxable accounts. I want accounts that can be held through market stress, tax seasons, life transitions, and years of boredom. That is why I also like the original video's use of age and goal to determine percentage mixes. Too many people ask for one perfect portfolio. There is no one perfect portfolio. There is only a portfolio coherent with a real human being. The source file gave 3 model profiles And the profiles themselves tell you something important. Younger and higher risk investors can tolerate more growth and even a modest aggressive sleeve. Middle career investors in high earning years may care more about tax efficiency and therefore tilt differently, including perhaps using VTV instead of SAG in the value slot. Near retirees may care much more about safety and qualified cash flow, leading to a heavier SAG weighting, lower aggressive exposure, and a stronger behavioral anchor. That is not inconsistency. That is design Fay file site, Fay turn 35 file 0, Fay I want to preserve that design logic in a Buffett-style way. A taxable account should not only fit the market, it should fit the owner. What age are you? What is the job of the account? Is this pure long-term wealth? Is this pre-retirement bridge money? Is this supplemental retirement flexibility? Is this a liquidity, available compounding engine for a person who still has decades to go? Those questions should shape percentages. Otherwise, people copy another man's portfolio and inherit his risks, his time horizon, and his emotional assumptions without inheriting his life. That is foolish. The file also mentions something I think almost nobody pays enough attention to. The taxable brokerage has a real advantage over retirement accounts. Access you can pull from it without the age-based penalties attached to many retirement structures. That flexibility is powerful, but it can also become a behavioral curse if the account is not mentally framed correctly. The moment a taxable account becomes your emotional ATM, its compounding future is gone. So the real skill is to enjoy the flexibility without converting it into casual leakage. That is an adult discipline, Fay file site, Fay turn 36 file 0, Fay 35, L40 Fay. That is why I would give the taxable account this identity. It is the forever bridge, not the forever temptation, not the forever experiment, the forever bridge. It must connect today, S surplus with tomorrow, S freedom, and it must do so in a way that respects tax character, broad compounding, optionality, and human behavior. This is why I reject sloppy taxable brokerage advice. If someone tells you just buy whatever you like and hold forever, he is not wrong in spirit. But he may be leaving out the exact details that make forever work in practice. Forever in a Roth is one thing, forever in a 401k is one thing, forever in a taxable account is another thing entirely. Taxes keep reaching into the machine. Distributions keep mattering. Turnover keeps mattering. Behavior keeps mattering. The account is more exposed to life. That is why the architecture must be cleaner. Let me say one more thing that I think people need to hear. The best taxable brokerage account is usually not the most interesting one. It is the one whose parts know why they are there. A qualified dividend Fay value sleeve that deserves its tax bill, a foundational U.S. ownership sleeve that can survive decades, a modest international sleeve that diversifies without pretending to dominate, a broad growth sleeve that keeps compounding pressure alive, and, only if justified, a small aggressive sleeve that the owner can emotionally survive. That is coherent, that is durable, that is buildable, that is holdable. That is what forever should sound like. Not one hot ETF, not one category mistake, not one seductive yield. A system. The original title of your source file wanted buy and hold forever. And that phrase is emotionally powerful. But the real question is not whether the holdings can be owned forever. The real question is whether the structure can be survived forever. Those are different questions. A person may buy a wonderful ETF and still fail, because the overall account is tax clumsy, behaviorally mismatched, or too concentrated in the wrong kind of income. That is why the structure matters more than the slogan. And if you ask me what the 5 best ETFs for a taxable brokerage in this style are, I will answer differently depending on the exact human being in front of me. But if I must stay close to the strongest logic in your reference document, I would say the shortlist is something like this. For qualified dividend Fay value ballast, South Carolina HD or VTV. For foundational U.S. ownership, VU or VTI. For international diversification, VXs. For broad growth, QQQM, with SAG or VUG as very respectable alternatives. For optional aggressive growth, BGT if and only if the person understands what that extra concentration means. That is not a bag of tickers. It is a disciplined hierarchy, and that hierarchy is what makes the account intelligent. Because in the end, a taxable brokerage account is not mainly about being clever. It is about being efficient enough, diversified enough, growth-oriented enough, tax-aware enough, and emotionally survivable enough that you can actually keep the money in the machine for years and decades. That is how buy and hold becomes real. Not by buying random things and swearing loyalty, by building a structure good enough to deserve loyalty. And that, to me, is the only kind of forever investing worth trusting. I want to add one final point, because this is where a lot of investors quietly lose the plot. They become so focused on picking the 5 best ETFs that they forget the 5. ETFs are not the point. The point is what kind of life the account is meant to support. A younger investor who still has decades of work ahead of him is not using the taxable account for the same purpose as a person in his 50s trying to build a bridge to early retirement. A near retiree looking for flexibility beyond the 401k is not solving the same problem as a 30-year old who simply wants another compounding engine beside his tax-advantaged accounts. That is why I distrust portfolio conversations that sound too universal. A portfolio is not just a collection of symbols. It is a statement about time horizon. It is a statement about taxes. It is a statement about temperament. It is a statement about what kinds of mistakes you are most likely to survive and which ones you are not. And a taxable brokerage account, more than almost any other account, punishes people who confuse generic ideas with personal design. That is why I would rather see a person own a very small number of well-understood ETFs in a clean, durable structure than own a dozen funds he cannot explain under pressure. Stress reveals whether a portfolio is yours or just borrowed language. When the market falls, when taxes arrive, when an unexpected expense appears, when a big gain tempts you, when a hot sector starts showing off, that is when you find out whether the account was actually designed or merely assembled. A designed account has hierarchy. It knows what is core, it knows what is supportive, it knows what is optional, it knows what role each holding plays, it knows what not to own in taxable, it knows where the tax drag lives, it knows where the emotional ballast lives. That kind of clarity is underrated. People want one magic ETF. I want them to build one coherent machine. Machines survive longer than excitement does. And in taxable investing, survival is the whole game, because if the structure survives, the compounding usually gets its chance. If the structure does not survive, the best ETFs in the world cannot save you from your own confusion. That is why I do not think the real question is simply which 5 ETFs are best. The real question is whether the account you are building deserves to be held forever. If the answer is yes, then forever becomes realistic. If the answer is no, then no title on earth can make it true. That is the difference between a watch list and a wealth plan, and I have always preferred wealth plans.